Everyone can please take their seats. We'll get started shortly.
All right, good afternoon again. So we have our panel here. Thank you guys all for your diligence. As people roll in for lunch, I'm gonna go ahead and just get us started, keep us on schedule because we do have a little more ahead. My next moderator, Andrew Brown. He was actually here when I was an intern, so he's part of my welcoming crew. So it's an honor to be able to introduce you. Andrew Brown is a JD. He's the Associate Vice President of the Policy at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Vice President of Policy, at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Brown has dedicated his career to serving vulnerable children and strengthening the family through community-focused, liberty-minded solutions. As an attorney, he has represented children in the child welfare system, advocated for the rights of parents, and helped build families through domestic and international adoption. Wow. Andrew earned his BA magna cum laude in political science from Baylor University, go Bears, and his JD from Southern Methodist University, Dedman School of Law. Dedman, right? Dedman, all right, thank you.
It's an ominous title for a law school. Well, good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us. Throughout our time together today, we've been discussing strategies for promoting human flourishing through education, economic development, and job creation. Our panel this afternoon focuses on what I believe to be one of the most important reasons for committing ourselves to this work, empowering our neighbors who are struggling in poverty. Texas and the nation are facing tough economic times. I think that will come as no surprise to everyone in this room. Inflation is driving up the costs of food, fuel, and life's basic necessities. We're all feeling the pain in our pocketbooks, but those most impacted are our low-income neighbors and friends. During the next hour, we'll be discussing how sound public policy can alleviate poverty and help more Texans experience the dignity that comes from work and a healthy community. But more importantly, we'll be discussing more than just the data and the policy. We'll be telling the stories of the actual people impacted by the economic downturn and celebrate those whose lives have been made better through the work of community organizations dedicated to promoting prosperity in some of the most underserved neighborhoods in our state. And I'm honored to be joined today by three men who have dedicated their lives to this critical work. Immediately to my left is a former colleague, current friend, Vance Ginn, Dr. Vance Ginn. He is a senior fellow of economics for the Texas Public Policy Foundation, as well as the founder and president of Ginn Economic Consulting. Woo-woo. Vance has produced high-quality research with free market reforms on multiple policy areas and has worked with other state think tanks on conservative budgeting approaches. He also served as the Associate Director for Economic Policy of the Office of Management and Budget at the Executive Office of the President from 2019 to 2020.
It's a mouthful.
Yeah, it is a mouthful. The short way of saying that is he worked at the White House.
Yeah.
And he advised the White House on economic and fiscal policy matters. He earned his doctorate degree in economics from Texas Tech University. Right there next to Vance is Darren Babcock. He is the founder and CEO of Bonton Farms in Dallas, Texas. In 2012, he left a successful corporate career and moved from his home in North Dallas to serve inner-city residents of the Bonton neighborhood with his wife, Theda. Bonton Farms is one of the largest urban farms in the United States, nestled in a once-forgotten neighborhood in South Dallas. Bonton Farms, though, is so much more than an urban farm. It's the catalyst that is helping to level the playing field, creating systemic change necessary so that residents of Bonton and others from marginalized neighborhoods all over the country can achieve the American dream that was promised over 200 years ago. And right there on the end, Alan Graham. He is the founder. Yes. He is the founder and CEO of Mobile Loaves and Fishes, based right here in Austin, Texas. Mobile Loaves and Fishes is a social outreach ministry committed to providing permanent, sustainable solutions for the chronically homeless while surrounding them with love, compassion, and dignity. Since its founding in 1998, Mobile Loaves and Fishes volunteers have served more than 6 million meals. and they're the largest prepared feeding program to the homeless and working poor in Austin. Alan and his wife Tricia have been married since September 1984 and have 4 children. Please join me in welcoming our panelists. Now, Vance, I want to start off with you. The economy obviously is at the top of mind these days. Get us just a quick overview of what the current state of the economy is and how it is impacting poverty in our country.
Sure. Thank you, Andrew, and all the work that you're doing as well. He's been working in this area, in this space, and helping families and others in poverty and also the child welfare space as well. So thank you for all the work that you do. And it's great to be back at TPPF. So it's always a pleasure. I really enjoyed the panels this morning too. It was a great discussion. I'm looking forward to the next one as well. There's a lot of good things that are going on here. The economy, right? The first things you might think about are gas prices. You might think about rent. You might think about property taxes. I mean, all of these things are influenced by the economy overall. And in short, inflation. Has your food prices been going up much? Yeah, all right. Gas prices are down a little bit now, but they're still up over $1 compared to where they were last year. So this hits people hard. And in fact, it hits the neediest among us the hardest, who can't afford it. And it's really, if you think about the people that are in poverty and they're getting these safety net programs, their benefits aren't increasing at that same rate. So they can't afford to put food on the table. They're having to make some really difficult choices right now of what they should do, whether they should go to work, whether they shouldn't go to work. In the poverty space, we call that benefits cliffs. Right? If you start to go to work, then you lose some of your benefits on the other side, and that's a whole other trade-off that we can talk about. But look, I think overall the economy is in a recession. We had 2 consecutive quarters of negative real GDP growth in the first quarter and second quarter across the nation. We may even have had that here in Texas. The first quarter was negative. It was a declining real economic output here in Texas as well. Some of the indicators, though, maybe don't indicate that. If you think about the unemployment rate across the United States is 3.7%. That seems pretty good. Many economists would consider that to be full employment. The problem is, and we were talking about this on the elevator up, is that doesn't include the 3 million people who haven't returned to the workforce since the pandemic. 3 million. If you add them back into the unemployment the way it's calculated, you're getting closer to the 7, 8, 9% sort of range that I think is being reflected across the economy today. And of course, that influences poverty. If you don't have a job, you're staying at home, maybe you were living off of savings. I mean, there was a lot of money that was sent out over the last 2 years. Y'all remember all those checks that were sent out? Nothing is free, as I say. There's a cost to all that. And I think a lot of that is coming home to roost now. It's why we're seeing the massive inflation. That's not just going to go away overnight. That you're going to see a slower economy in the future. And so all of this sets the stage for the things we're going to talk about today, that more and more families are going to feel the struggle. I mean, look, in 2020, the latest data that we have available for poverty, the poverty rate across the nation was 11.4%. 11.4%. In Texas, it was 13.4%. If you think about just the black poverty rate, closer to 20% just in Texas. The new data for 2021 will come out next week, so we'll see what the new data show. But it started to go back up in 2020. We'll probably see it go up a little bit more in 2021. And there are reasons for this that I know we'll get into here, but one of my big parts of my research are the importance of institutions. And we really need to figure out ways to strengthen our institutions. Find ways where we have safety nets to make sure that the dollars are going to the people that they're intended to go to compared to other programs or waste, fraud, abuse. And if we do that, I think we can give a better helping hand for people to have financial, long-term self-sufficiency. Not just a short, hey, here you go, and then they go back into society and they come right back on these safety net programs, but really start to teach financial literacy. The thing called the success sequence, where if you graduate high school, get a full-time job, and get married before you have kids, in that order, you're 97% chance of not being in poverty. 97%. And that's across all races, genders, and everything else. There are simple things that we can do, but we really need to start talking about these things more. So I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you for giving us that foundation to build our conversation from. I'm going to turn to Darren and Alan. The folks you serve are some of the most acutely impacted by economic instability. Tell us about the organizations you lead and your philosophy in the approach to poverty alleviation.
Well, ours is pretty specific to the inner city context, right? So Darius is my good friend here that came with me, and the only reason I'm up here is because he was gracious enough to let me journey with him. And so in doing life together, I learned all this, but it's not my lived experience. So, Bonton, like so many others, is a freedmen's community. It was established like a lot of inner city communities post-slavery, where blacks had to find a place to live, but they couldn't live where there were other people or other infrastructure. The thing that baffles me, as somebody that came into this late at life, I was 47 when I got introduced to Bonton, and I had no clue of any of this. In fact, if you know anything about the inner city, if you're received there, you have a hood name. And so my first hood name I can't say in public. But my second one was the no way guy, because every time they would teach me, I was like, there's no way, I don't believe you. Like this, we can't be this regressed, and it's still in this day and time. In the richest country in the history of the world, there's no way this stuff can be, and yet it is. And so, the war on poverty, I think almost everything we go to war against actually has the reverse effect of it. But we built public housing to put more people congregated in places with no infrastructure. And so here, to summarize, we have about 20 to 25% of all Americans today that are born into a place of poverty. And what hasn't happened from that systemic design of creating communities to be separated, and see, I always thought separation was from each other, like they were designed to keep us separated from each other. And that is absolutely true, but the bigger part of the crime was that it separated us from all the other tools that everybody else had to use to build their life with. And in 2022, almost all inner city communities are still food deserts. They're still economic deserts. Their schools don't have equitable education to prepare our kids to compete in a free market economy. We don't have access to health care, and we don't have access to non-predatory lending. And if you take those 5 deficits and try to build a life on it, it's almost impossible. Either you are so intellectually gifted that all of those encumbrances can't hold you back, or you're so athletically gifted. But what a crime it is for our country. The way I see it is our community's filled with gold, and that gold is human potential, these beautiful lives of people that were created with special things to do, and yet they're born into these circumstances, this environment where I don't have the tools to use, and so I become something less than I could have been. And so what we've done with poverty alleviation methods, because that's a midstream issue, poverty's created by the system we design. So I think too often we're masters of hitting the bullseye of the wrong target, because we're trying to put Humpty Dumpty's back together again, where if we address the systemic issue, we wouldn't have them fall in the first place, because our community is more than capable. But I kind of have this word picture of seeing us, there's a mountain filled with gold, and we're in the stream with these little pans, mining out the flakes that wash down in the water. And those are the people that make it out for some reason. Where we could rebuild the system, where everybody had the tools they needed, and the vast majority would use those tools to build a flourishing life with. And that's the great experiment of Bonton Farms, is we have all the deficits. Out of the 3,800 zip codes in the state of Texas, we incarcerate the highest percentage of people. We have the second highest teen birth rate, highest infant mortality rate. We haven't graduated more than 54% of our kids from high school in 40 years. We suffer from more than double the rate of cancer, stroke, heart disease, diabetes, and childhood obesity than the county we're in. And men in our community will live 12 years less than the average lifespan of a man in Dallas County. And yet, we believe, we have this audacious idea that if we had the tools, that those outcomes would normalize, because we're capable.
Thank you for that. Alan, we'd love to hear more about mobile loaves and fishes.
Everything Darren said.
Well, thank you all for joining us.
No, we're at the very bottom of the food chain, and we serve the chronically homeless men and women that are on the streets. The men and women that live in the community that we built, which is about 7 miles directly east from here. We have about 400 people, formerly chronically homeless. Average time on the streets is 9 years, so from 40 years down to 1 year. the average age within our population is 56 years old. Average age of death is 59 years old. 65% have 2 or more comorbid diseases. They're living on the streets in abject poverty under the crappiest healthcare system for people who live in poverty that you could ever possibly imagine. I too did not come from the lived experience of poverty. I raised my family in Westlake Hills, the neighborhood here, for 34 years. But for the past 5.5 years, I've lived in a community of extraordinary diversity and people who live at the lowest level of poverty, the $800 a month SSI, SSDI type folks. These are the men and women that you see living under the bridge, in our alleyway, street corners, crack addicts, heroin, fentanyl, meth, prostitution. When you talk about criminal records, almost every single one are coming to the table with a felony criminal history. I have personally spent 250 nights on the streets sleeping with them. We called them sleepovers. And in that process, ended up falling in love with some of the most gifted humans on the planet, and I came with all the structural biases that you could have about people, you begin to learn, like when you look at the panhandler standing on the street corner, and God, there's so much opportunity out here. And then I realized that these are some of the greatest yet most ineffective entrepreneurs on the face of the planet. They're no longer allowed to sell bottles of water, newspapers, flowers, cow skulls, cow skins, and Darren's favorite, velvet Elvis art. And so they're reduced to the only remaining bastion of entrepreneurialism remaining, which is the First Amendment free speech right to stand there and beg. And that is the United States of America today. You can't go to any other country on the face of the planet where people aren't out there selling you everything that you possibly could purchase. And these occupational licensing requirements and the interference of government. So we tried to overturn this within our village amongst the 400 people that currently live there and growing. And I will tell you that last year, our neighbors, through a variety of micro enterprises, earned over $1.2 million in dignified income. Go ahead and clap. I saw that going down. And when he talks about mining gold, I'm talking about gold. I'm talking about artists that are equally as gifted to the greatest artists you've ever seen on the planet, people that battle mental health issues, schizophrenia, bipolar disorders, schizoaffective depression, with stuff coming out of their brain onto a canvas that you just cannot fathom, and that art is valuable. We have a partnership today with Kendra Scott. Anybody Kendra Scott fans in here? Somebody's wearing it, I'm sure, right now. Yeah. And they're creating jewelry for Kendra Scott and ceramics and maintenance and property beautification and woodworking. And these are literally entrepreneurs that are begging to be entrepreneurs. When I left the Houston, Texas area in 1976 and came to Austin, there wasn't a panhandler on any street corner anywhere. And Houston was full of men and women selling things, from watermelon stands to the newspapers to the flowers. You name it, they were out there. And yes, they were poor. There's nothing wrong with being poor. There's something wrong with being in poverty that strips you of all of your dignity. I've been into places around the world in some of the most impoverished places ever on the planet and met some of the happiest people that you'll ever meet, because they're working every single day in dignity. And so we have to figure out a way to help us get government out of the way, in the way when we need government, but out of the way when it impedes our ability to go out there and and do some things. And we're seeing miracles amongst an extraordinarily poor population, same miracles that you witnessed. And I'll tell you, people want to work. We're wired by God to work. Amen?
While we're on the subject of government and its role in the problems and the solutions, the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness has released data recently showing that homelessness in the U.S. has increased every year for the past 4 years. From your perspective, what's the current state of homelessness, both nationally as well as here in Austin, where it's been a particular concern in recent years?
Well, we believe that the single greatest cause to homelessness is a profound, catastrophic loss of family. It is not drug addictions, mental health issues, affordable housing, living wages, the criminal justice system. Those are huge issues in terms of issues of justice. But every family in here has somebody battling a mental health issue or an addiction issue in their family. And almost invariably, no matter how dysfunctional that is, you have managed to come up underneath that family member and keep them out from under the bridges. And so when you start looking at all the percentages, like the 97% that will graduate from high school and, wait to have kids, till after they're married and all that stuff. 100% of the people that live on the streets of Austin, Texas, and everywhere, USA, are coming from traumatically broken, fatherless families, or families where the level of trauma was so extensive, where women are being sold into prostitution at an early age, men are being sold. My buddy who died a week and a half ago, good friend of mine, a chapter in my book, his daddy used to sell him to other men when he was 10 years old. And these aren't choices that you make as a 10-year-old, I'm just telling you right now. So if somehow we could begin to address the power of the family, we're going to be able to figure out how to, solve a lot of these problems. But that's what usage misses. And that's where HUD is missing the boat, is recognizing, and really what Bonton and Mobile Loaves and Fishers are doing is attempting to recreate and build a forged family around a population of people that we as a society want to abandon, discard. And we've got to figure another way around that deal.
Well, both of your organizations have been inspirational for lawmakers in this state, and just this last session, there was a bill, House Bill 359, that was inspired by the work that you all are doing, Darren, and so much so that we called it the Bonton Farms Bill in the halls of the Capitol. What was the goal of the legislation, and what results have you seen from it in the almost 2 years since it's been law?
Well, again, to my friend Darius, and I'll tell a bit of a story here. I'm an addict in recovery, so I had been through stuff before, but in my darkest times, I had family and friends that wouldn't quit on me when I'd quit. And so when you come out of something like that, things change, or at least for me they did. My priorities changed. Like I wasn't about money and stuff and status and stuff anymore. I somehow wanted to give back, but I don't know how you do that. And it was 10 years that God shaped me between that before I got introduced to Bonton and found where that home was. But I walked in the door the first day in Bonton. It was, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Bonton neighborhood, but there's two ways in and 2 ways out. And it doesn't matter what color you are. If you're not from Bonton, you can't go there, or you couldn't back then. And so my first time there, they said, you got to stop at the floodgates, which, by the way, we still have floodgates because we're built on the Trinity River as an old freedmen's community. And they used to close those floodgates to keep the water in our community so it wouldn't flood the rest of the city. So this is still there, and this is where we meet up. It's one of those things I'd say, no way. Like that, no way. And so I go to the house the first time, and it's the house that Darius lives in now. Both projects had been torn down. So our community went from 6,000 people to 1,200 people overnight. All the nonprofits, NGOs left the community except for this one guy. And he bought this house and had a place where men would come together and have a Bible study on Saturday morning. And that's what I got invited into. So I have to have people meet me at a floodgate. I'm already intimidated, like I've never had to have that happen before. Everybody's watching you when you come in. And then I go to this house, and as I walk up the driveway, there's somebody yelling on the other side of the door, a little more intimidating. He was pissed. And he was saying, he was in the middle of this story, I just got released from federal prison. I got this GPS monitor on. The terms of my parole say that it's supposed to come off in 90 days, and now they're telling me they won't take it off till I get a job. So here's what happens. I'm required to get 3 interviews a week. So I go get my 3 interviews a week. I have to turn them in to my parole officer. They call and say, do you know that federal inmate number so-and-so, his name's blah, 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 is coming in for an interview on this date and time. I need you to confirm it. It's confirmed. Please know that if his interview goes beyond this time, police will be dispatched. So make sure you keep it on time. And that's what happens before they meet me. Had another guy say, well, I got released to a halfway house, and I'm going to have to pay $200 a month. I get a $50 check when I leave TDC. I have to pay $200 a month to stay in this house that I'm required to stay in. I'm selling dope so I don't violate parole, so I don't go back to prison for selling dope. And I'm like, no way. No way. You know. And my friend Darius, we used to have a Pilgrim's Pride plant behind our community, and it's one of the only employers we had, so everybody's tried to get a job there. And they don't hire people with felony convictions. So everybody knows that, and he comes in one Saturday bragging he went for an interview, and he called him back for another interview. We're like, no, they didn't. They don't hire people like us.
No way.
Yeah, no way. And he said, yes, they did. So he took his check, his $50 check from the TDC, and when you make your first parole visit, they give you another $50 check. So he had a whopping $100, and he bought a suit with it because he was going to prove us wrong. Only guy probably ever interviewed for a job in a suit, chicken processing job in a suit. And he's sitting in the lobby, and the guy comes out with his clipboard, and he says, he sees him dressed up, which isn't normal, and he says, I hope you didn't think we called you back for another interview. And he said, yes, sir, you did. And he said, no, we called you back because one of my managers saw when you came in the first time and said you look like a guy that robbed us.
Dang. Yeah.
That's the... Sorry. You know, this is the stuff we hear about on the news, right? Because you don't hear the story behind the story. What almost happened is that guy almost lost his life. Because when you take the hope from people, hopeless people do dangerous things. Yeah. So this amazing man not only was robbed of his dignity for work and to be a human being, but almost cost him his life forever, because what people respond to when you're treated like that is to take somebody else's life. And this is the chain reaction that we see play out over and over and over. And so when you talk about family, what we see in Bonton is that family is cultural. And when you have economic instability and you don't have dignity, the family starts to fall apart. But what we see in Bonton, where economic stability returns and dignity occurs, the family comes back together. And so it's really on what you focus on. But if we do the things that allow people to live a dignified, beautiful life on their own, people are drawn to that naturally. But it falls apart under all of these different oppressive things. So in 10 years in Bonton Farms, we've never had a person reoffend. We have a 0% recidivism. That shouldn't be amazing. I haven't ever met anybody that wants to go back to prison. Not one. In fact, I never met anybody really that wanted to go to prison in the first place, but my back's against the wall, you know? And again, we just think that if you remove barriers, free people are capable of extraordinary things. And so we started advocating. People started asking questions, why do you have a 0% recidivism? It's because you guys put all these barriers in place, and we just walk with them through them. But it would be so much better if they were gone. And they're like, well, what are those barriers? And there's a low-hanging fruit where men and women come home from prison. If you go to a state or federal prison, you get arrested in a place. And that place is in a city or a county. And I've never walked with a man or woman coming home from prison that didn't have fines and warrants in the city and county they got arrested in. So say I did 20 years or 10 years or 5 years, and I come home, and they say, get it together, don't come back. And the first thing I do is I walk into the DMV like we did to try to get his license after that. So the next thing that happened is we're not going to have that happen again. You're not going to kill that man. We're going to make this, and I'm going to do it with you. we got to go to the DMV, get your ID. And now a constable comes up behind him and says, you need to step over here, step up against the wall, spread your put your arms up and spread your legs apart. And I'm, what's going on? He just got released from prison. We're here to get everything on track. And he's like, well, he has 44 unpaid tickets from before he got arrested that were $30-something thousand in fine. And now you're trying to build a life and you get arrested again. I mean, the things this guy's overcome, it's unbelievable. So we started telling this story, and Scott Sanford, I got invited to watch a hockey game with AT&T, and in there was Scott Sanford, who is a House of Representative, and I met him, and he said he's from McKinney Prosper, which has nothing to do with our work. So I said, nice to meet you. And then at one of the breaks, somebody said he's on the Criminal Jurisprudence Committee. So I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm going to ruin your hockey game. You've got to hear this story. And the next week, he drove to Bonton to hear their testimonies and their stories, and then worked with Senator Royce West to create a bipartisan bill that removes the fines and warrants for men and women in the state of Texas returning home from prison, and that passed into law last legislative session. And in large part because of the support of TPPF and a lot of the advocates and companies that you guys have on your sides that have lobbyists, who we have no money and no lobbyists, but everybody rallied behind it and passed into law.
Well, here's another quick barrier. Just you can be arrested, charged with a crime, indicted, convicted, incarcerated without ever having one piece of ID, and serve time in prison. And then in order to get that piece of ID, when you come out of prison, takes a gauntlet of problems when virtually everybody that lives in the United States of America, and there are a few illegals here, we don't have to worry about them right now, we can fingerprint you and know within a reasonable period of time, is that Darren Babcock or is it not? And if it's Darren Babcock, take his effing picture and put it on a little plastic card so that he can carry around a full ID, right? And let it be $100. I don't care what the cost is, but quit making them get birth certificates and things from school and utility bills and things that are impossible to get now.
Something we've been talking about is, why not have them get a license before they get out?
Well,
I mean, there's all this process.
Stupid is as stupid does, Vance. Yeah. Quoting Forrest Gump. Yeah.
Well, what we're really talking about right now in the work that y'all are doing, here in TPPF, we talk about institutions of civil society. You alluded to it earlier and how important those are as opposed to government action for actually addressing many of the problems that we're highlighting today. Vance, for those who might not be as familiar with the policy nerd speak that you and I are so comfortable with, explain this concept of civil society and the role that these institutions play in promoting prosperity.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're part of that. Y'all are part of the civil society that's helping people. The discussion that was happening earlier today with those panels are the civil society that's helping out. You've got some government workers as well with the Texas Workforce Commission. They're helping out as well in this process. And you really need all of them to come together to allow for us to have the opportunities for people to prosper. That's my mantra that I say all the time, is let people prosper. And really it is about getting government out of the way where it needs to come out of the way, but also to allow for families. That's the key thing here that y'all talked about. I mean, really you think about the social institutions, political institutions, and economic institutions, and the way that those all work together. When I would teach at Texas Tech or Sam Houston, I would usually draw like a Venn diagram and how all three of these circles, those institutions, how they come together and how they work together. But too often what we see is that some of these institutions, like the political institutions, will get too large and they'll overlap too much with the social institutions and with the family. And I think that's what we've seen. Since 1965, so 1964 is when LBJ declared the war on poverty, right? Since then, $25 trillion, adjusted for inflation, okay, has been spent by 80 federal programs and across the United States on different programs, $25 trillion. Yet we still have so many people in poverty, so many people who are homeless, who don't have the opportunity. And so you start digging into the numbers more, Andrew, about, well, what does that mean? Well, when you start thinking about who is in poverty, 20%, no, 1 out of every 4, so 25%, 1 out of every 4 of those who are single mothers, right? Single mothers are in poverty, 1 out of every 4. But 1 out of every 2, 50%, are single mothers with a child under the age of 6 are in poverty. 1 out of every 2. Where's the dads? Are they locked up? Yep. There's minor drug charges or something else? What else is happening there? 70% of blacks born are by unmarried women. 70%. 33%, 1 out of every 3 for whites. There's something going on here that's all about the family as well, where it starts with that and then it persists. This is why we have a system of generational poverty. It's something that we've been looking at a lot at the foundation of in our Alliance for Opportunity discussion of how do we really start to overcome some of these barriers that y'all talked about. Occupational licensing is a big one, where you can't get your foot in the door and have that entrepreneurial spirit. That doesn't necessarily help out with the family part of it. But what about those who feel like they're trapped? I know, like, talking to some of the folks at Bonton Farms, they feel trapped within our poverty system. Because if you get a little bit more income, what happens? You lose more of those payments that are coming from the government, from the taxpayers, from all of us at the same time. And so it disincentivizes you from getting that job. So what if there are ways that we can overcome some of those obstacles and make sure that dollars are going to the people we're trying to help and not to all the other programs that are out there? And I think by understanding more about the importance of the family and strengthening the family, that's why that success sequence, which maybe doesn't help everyone who's already homeless today, but we can help out the kids in the next generations from not being as much in poverty if they can at least understand the pathway to prosperity. How many of us got here. I mean, many of us did not start off where we're at today, right? I started off with low-income area in South Houston, 45 in Edgebrook, if y'all know where that's at. And it's not the best of areas. It took a car accident and the grace of God for me to go on and be a first-generation college student, get a PhD in economics, and then be here with all of you. But my life was not heading in that direction. I was a drummer for a rock band. I was living the rock star life. I don't even need to go into all the details, but let's just say that was happening. And I should not be here today, right? Just like you. Like we always come from different places, and my goal, my calling is to let people prosper, find ways to remove those obstacles. I don't care what color people are. We're all Americans. We're all God's gift, that gold that's here now. And so how do we overcome the obstacles that we're in? So we've got to keep working for it, Andrew.
All right. Absolutely. Well, one of our goals.
This is like a revival, man.
It really is.
Yeah.
I'm loving this. Yeah.
Gonna get down. Yeah. We're gonna bring the Lord in here. Amen. Bring him in. Yeah, bring him in. Let him use him. Yeah.
Well, and that was one of our goals for this panel, actually. I told Erin Valdez at lunch that I felt like my job was to get you all riled up for her panel that's going to be immediately following us. But we're being intentional. We're wanting to put a human face on the data and the statistics. I think too often as policy professionals, we get really down into the weeds of the data and the evidence. It's important because we are trying to change law and practice in the state of Texas, and you've got to have the evidence to back up what you're selling. But in that process, I think we also lose sight of the human beings behind those numbers. And what Alan and Darren, I think what y'all are doing so well and what you do so well is really focus on the human condition, the souls, the hearts, the gold, as you so eloquently put it. And it even comes down to the language that you use. One of the really interesting things as we were preparing for the panel and had our call, y'all use different words, and I'm having to adjust even the words that I'm using in this conversation today to make sure I'm saying the right thing. But Alan, at Community First, you don't talk about clients or beneficiaries, you say neighbors. And I'd like for you to tell us a little bit more about why you made this decision and the importance of that language choice to the work that you all do.
Well, a lot of it really has to do what is the meaning of home, and we've gotten into believing that these hermetically sealed single-family sarcophaguses that we call the American dream that we live in.
Some big words there.
Yeah,
I like it.
That's the home, but the reality is that's only the bedroom. to the home. And the home is this community that we live in, whether it's the Bonton neighborhood, that is the home. And anthropologically, that's how we always grew up. We grew up in these tribes and these clans of a group of people that had different domiciles. But in America, we've become isolated in these hermetically sealed single-family sarcophaguses with 8-foot-tall privacy fences and swimming pools, sport courts, and barbecue pits. And whereas some of us that are a little bit older, I see some gray hair in here, we got on our bicycles and rode to the community pool, right? And we got in that pool with 100 other kids that were all peeing in the pool at the same time. Amen. We fell in love. And we fell out of love at that swimming pool. We had fights. He and I were fighting over, the beautiful women that were over there, and then we became best friends. And this is what happens in community, and if you're isolated inside of a place. So when I see my neighbors standing on my street corners, no matter where they are the neighbors to my home called Austin, Texas. This is my home. This is the place that my compass is always oriented towards, no matter where I am in the entire world. And now that I live in the middle of a community with formerly chronically homeless, still people battling mental health issues, drug issues, all the things that they are, these are my neighbors, and they're part of the marinade. So if you have crazy Uncle Louie that lives in your hood, right, and if crazy Uncle Louie is out when it's 32 degrees barefoot, you should be calling around figuring out where you can get a pair of shoes, not calling the cops to figure out what to do about crazy Uncle Louie. And he's our neighbor, and we're not fixing whatever that problem is that he's got going on, but we can get a pair of shoes on him. So that's why. Woo!
Yeah. All right.
He started it, man. He started it with this guy right here.
There in Bonton Farms, you use navigators, not case managers. Again, this idea that language matters. Explain your philosophy to that approach with language.
I mean, the Bible tells us that life and death are in the power of the tongue. And I think truth is, everything good is based on truth. So if that's truth, then I bet you everybody in here has had somebody tell you something derogatory about yourself that for some point in time stunted who you were. I'll never forget the first girl I fell in love with told me one day in 3rd grade that I had a big butt, and that was before that was cool. And I walked around trying to tuck my tail, acting like I didn't. But things stick with you. I wrestled at the University of Oklahoma, and I went there in 1984, and I thought I was all that until I walked in the room, and it was right after the Olympics, and we had 3 Olympians and 2 gold medalists. And it's all of a sudden I don't belong, and I have no confidence. And the first tournament we were in, when you're a freshman, you don't get the real coaches, you get the graduate assistants. And so I've got a kid coaching me, and first, right off the bat, right when the whistle blows, I get thrown to my back. And the whole period I have to fight off my back, and did. And so I'm going in between periods, and the coach is kind of drying you off, and my head coach walks by on the way to another match, said, "How's he doing?" He's like, "Not good, he got thrown to his back." And he slapped me on the butt and said, "It's okay, he's a warrior, he always comes back." That's not even true. I'd never had to come back in high school. I never lost in high school, but all of a sudden now I am. But you know what? I wasn't that great an athlete, and that became who I was, and he spoke that into me. And so when we walk around, and even the language we use, second chance, I want to ask you something. Who in here hasn't screwed up so bad that if you got caught, you would be second chance? Yeah. So why do we use second chance? Because that creates them as a subclass. It's just another chance, right? Who hasn't had a second chance? I don't know of anybody. So we're creating this dominant class and this subclass, and we use, generally speaking, and when we work with other people, what do you call the person that works with somebody that's been through hell and back? The case manager. Everybody we talk to says, "Man, I caught a case. I have a parole officer. You're referring me back to the case I caught, and you feel like a parole officer telling me what to do." And you know what? I'm just as broken as the man that walks off the street and says, "I have nothing, I need help. I have nothing but you. Will you please help me?" And you know what? This relationship, it's like a symbiotic relationship. Like, I'm not good at math, but if there was an equation, you don't get to the answer without the right inputs. And so when we relate with one another, with the way you were talking about community, we need each other. And the more diversity, the more diverse life experiences, and those that have never suffered and those that have. I'll tell you this, when I moved to Bonton, I had a guy that came there every day. He's like the old bull elk that used to run the harem, and then he got thrown out. And when I'd come home from work every day, kids were throwing rocks at him and beating him up, and he'd have all these horrible stories to tell. And so every day when I came home, he was waiting on me. And one day I came home, and he was waiting for me, and I had this really long day. And I just needed 30 minutes. I needed to get out of my clothes, have an iced tea and catch my breath. And I said, man, I had a hard day. Can I have some time? And I saw his eyes light up. You see, every day he came to me needing help. And for the first time, he had a chance to help me. He didn't know he's helping me all along anyway, because there's this power paradigm. We create this structure. And so he's like, what happened? And I can't rob him of that. So I tell him about my day. And when I'm done, he's like, what else? And I said, that's it. And he said, shit. I hadn't had a bad day since, because the truth of the matter is I hadn't had a bad day. And so I think we need each other, and I think the power of words are way more impactful than we know. And I think when we're conscious about it, instead of lazy with our words, we have the ability to speak life into people. And we also have the ability to squelch them and to limit them from who they've been told their whole life they're nothing. Nobody believes them. We keep that up.
I know we're going to questions. Just real quick though, I think that's why it's so important that these communities, these navigators and neighbors are a part of the poverty solution, a bigger part of the poverty solution than just government dollars being sent out. You know what I mean? And then these government workers, you end up just being another number, and they're pushing papers instead of trying to reconnect you to society and what we call social capital, building the network around you, which is where we got a couple good papers on our website, or the TPPF website, Unleashing Opportunity and Empowerment Accounts. We need to empower these people to overcome the challenges that are in their life, that we have all faced different challenges. They can do it. They can be self-sufficient, because too often we set them back as a second-rate citizen when they need to be right there on the front lines with us.
I'm getting the signal that we need to transition to audience Q&A, unless you all want us to hijack the rest of this conference and keep going. Can we do that, Erica?
10 minutes. You have 10 minutes of hijacking.
10 minutes of hijacking. We have a tradition at Texas Public Policy Foundation that a question is a short statement that ends in a question mark. And I will be enforcing that rule relentlessly. But before we transition to your all's questions, please join me again in thanking our incredible panel. And I'm going to use moderator's privilege. We left y'all hanging a little bit, I think, with Darius's story, and he's right down here in front. And we arranged a little bit of this beforehand, so I'm not springing on him. Yeah. But would love for you to contribute, and if we can get a mic over to him.
You want here, D?
Hey, Darius, come sit right here, man.
No, man.
No, you can sit up there for a minute.
Oh, man. This is cool. Oh, man, thanks.
So we heard the lead up. How did it all turn out?
Oh, man, I was one of those guys, man, like, oh, I'm sorry. I'm not used to sitting on this side.
You're doing great.
Yeah, it's warmer. It feels better up here.
Vance sweats a lot, so I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, I can get used to this.
That's Vance's big butt that warmed up that chair, man.
But my dad once told me that if you ever want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. Because my plans were totally different, man, when, you know, from what I was expecting. When Darren came to the community, I was probably one of the biggest adversaries. I didn't like him. I couldn't stand him. Nobody in the community looked like him. He moved next door to my mom, and my mom, she instantly became a fan. And she started drilling me, you know, you need to talk to Darren, you need to talk to Darren. I had just started dialysis maybe a year and a half when Darren moved in. And, you know, in communities like mine, the sick and the elderly are normally the ones that people pray over, that they, you know, that they take advantage of. And so with me becoming sick, I had immediately had my first glance at what it looks like when the predator becomes the prey. You know, I just felt, I can't even explain it. I was going to all these guys that I thought were my friends, and at every turn somebody was disappointing me because I was no longer any good to them. You know what I'm saying? And so when I go to visit my mom, she lived up the street, and I would go to visit her, and she, hey, you talked to Darren? Have you talked to Darren? I'm like, no, but obviously you have, and you, I mean, I don't need to talk to him because you, and so she's like, you got to meet him. He sold his house up north and moved to Bonton. I said, Mama, listen, nobody sells good land up north and moves to a Bonton. I said, that man is one of three things. He's either a police, or a cop. I said, he might be one, he might be all three, I don't know. But I don't know him. I don't want to know him. He's your friend. I'm happy for y'all. Do your thing. So, like I said, and that kind of, my mom, she had me when she was 15. She had to leave school early. My mom can't read, so her gift was always cooking. She cooks for the church. She cooks for the community. She cooks for elderly people in the community. She takes every. She cooked for the police. Yeah. Yeah. And so I would normally go to her house for dinner, and I got tired of her trying to push him on me, and so I just stopped going. So she would call me and tell me, you know, I just finished cooking. I made, chicken tetrazzini. I got some vegetables. I got some corn. And I'm like, no, I'm fine. I'm full. And I was hungry, man. My stomach was touching my back. I hadn't eaten nothing. I had depleted like everything in my cabinet, a canned good for breakfast, canned good for lunch, canned good for dinner, until it was gone. But, you know, I had that much pride to where I just didn't go up there. And, you know, with the things that I was doing in the street, money was never a problem for me, you know. But, you know, for me to get sick and not be able to provide for myself, I was having one of the hardest times I ever had in my life. I was hungry. And I had never been hungry before. You know, my great-grandparents, they practically raised me because my mom had to work because she was a young parent that had to drop out of school. And so just listening to everything that my great-grandmother had imputed in me, man, something just came over me. I'm sitting on the porch one day, I'm crying, and I couldn't even call it, today I can't call it a prayer. It was a conversation. I had a conversation with God, you know. And just from what she had told me and from what I had read, you know, I'm like, you know, you helped the blind see. You brought the dead back to life. You did this, you did that, and your child is hungry. You know, and I got my head down and I'm crying while I'm having this conversation, and I hear a horn blow. Guess who it was? The police. The police. So I look up, my house sit kind of far back from the porch, so he couldn't tell that I was crying. And he let his window down. He said, man, I was about to go grab some lunch, and I was wondering if you wanted to join me. Wow. So I said, give me a minute. I went in the house, cleaned my face so he couldn't tell that I was crying. I went back to the truck, and he told me, you know, man, a lot of people told me not to bother you, to leave you alone, that you were unapproachable, but I just didn't want to have lunch by myself today. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So I got in the truck. He asked me what was my favorite place. And I think I told him Papa Do's. Yeah. Had never been there. I just Papa Do's. You know, yeah. I was just seeing if he was bluffing. Yeah. So we went to Papa Do's, man, and we sat down and we got to know each other. You know, I've been through so many different trials and challenges, from being shot, from being robbed and put in the trunk of a car, all these different things, and I overcame that, and I always credited myself until, you know, when I lost, you know, just the ability to take care of myself and fend for myself and feed myself, and I realized that I had nothing to do with none of that it was all God, you know. And so during that time, not only did he open my eyes and my ears, he opened up my heart, you know, to just look into some other resources and not to see, you know, just people that don't look like me, to see them as you know, yeah, I was trying to keep from, yeah. And so we started walking together, you know, and he told me, you know, what drew me to him more than anything was everybody that he encountered in that community, he asked them the same question. He said, if you had nothing holding you back, no background, no traffic violations, no health limitations, what would you do? Can you imagine a community, man, of 1,500 people? And well, he didn't meet them all, but the ones that he did meet, from 200 to 300 people, hardly none of them can answer that question. I remember maybe 4 people who could answer that question. And a lot of them just kind of shrugged their shoulders and shook their head. Nothing, you know what I'm saying? They came up with nothing. Even, can you imagine a kid, man, that didn't want to be a police officer or a fireman or Batman or somebody? Right. You know what I'm saying? That whole community had been robbed of that. But when we started these different programs and having people to work with us and invest in us, you know what I'm saying? I saw people come back a year later and tap them on the shoulder. Hey, remember last year you asked me what I wanted to do? You know, I remember that one time, man, I wanted to do this, and I wanted to be that, and I wanted to leave a legacy, you know, behind. That was mind-blowing to me, man. That was mind-blowing. And not to take up too much more of your time, but he, when he came down, he asked me one time, he said, well, he was telling a group of guys that, you know, I want to help you guys build resumes and all these different things, and, you know, but y'all have to, you know, you have to show up, you have to work hard, you know what I'm saying? And so I said, I'd love to be a part of what you're doing, but I can't come on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And he was like, well, I guess you don't want to be a part of what we're doing, you know, and it hurt. You know what I'm saying? Because now I feel invested. I open up to you and I trust you. So later on, he came back and he was like, why can't you come? I said, I'm on dialysis. You know, I go to and so in my community, man, you have to hide that. Yeah. I had been hiding that, you know, and I said, my kidneys don't work and I have to do dialysis to stay alive. Once again, he was like, no way. No way. I said, yes, way. Stop saying that, man. I don't want you to say that again. Please stop saying that. So he said, well, I want to go with you to see what that's like. Because, I mean, where I come from, everybody's healthy. Everybody's wrestling and playing football. I've never seen that because I'm explaining to him the whole process of it. And most of the guys that were meeting with us at that house, they had health limitations. One guy, Willie, he was in his 30s and he went blind due to diabetes, you know. And I had end-stage renal failure by the time I was 36 years old, you know. So he go to dialysis with me one day, and it was on a Wednesday. And it just so happened that the doctor's making the rounds to give me the lab reports from my dialysis sessions. And so he said, Doc, is this like a life sentence for him? Does he have to do this for the rest of his life? Or, you know, what's going on? And the doctor told him, no, he needs a kidney. So he said, where do I sign up to see if I'm a match? You know, I got people and family in my community I've been around all my life. Nobody's ever offered to do that. Nobody. And he said, well, take him to whoever his transplant coordinator is. And I'm just listening to him, and I'm almost for sure that he's going to back out, you know, when he hears how, you know. No way. So we left there, went to Parkland Hospital. He signed the papers. They told him what he had to do when his appointment started, man, and he went through the whole process. You know what I'm saying? Unfortunately, he wasn't a match, but he offered. I got kids, brothers and sisters. He offered. He offered. Now, later on, my mom applied for a Habitat home, and she moved, and I moved next door to him. So I'm in the house one day, and I knew a lot of the community still didn't accept him and didn't have, you know, they weren't fans yet, you know. And so I'm in the house, and I see lights, and it's an ambulance. And every time I see that, I automatically assume that somebody's tried to make a threat on his life or something, you know what I'm saying? So I go running out the house, you know, put a T-shirt on, run out the house. He's coming out on a gurney, and he's screaming like a girl. He's screaming, oh, it hurts. And I'm like, what's going on? What's wrong? I didn't see any blood, so I knew he wasn't shot. I'm like, what's going on? And so his wife told me, he's got kidney stones. I'm like, oh, yeah, that's why you wanted to give me a kidney, because you got bad kidney. Yeah. But he's definitely making a difference in the community, man. I thank God, for guys like him, and these guys just every day, man, because the whole Bonton Farms mission could have went anywhere in the world, but it came to my community, man. And I just hope other people who come down and they get a chance to witness and view what we're doing, that they use this as a template to take back to their communities. We're starting a health and wellness program. I'm the manager of health and wellness and I'm a convicted felon. But I have the opportunity to speak with people and walk with people in my community to help them get the services that I was deprived of at one time. So, and that's a blessing, man.
Darius, thank you for sharing and for letting us drag you up on stage when you weren't expecting that part of it. Well, we definitely appreciate it. Okay, we got time for a few questions, and we'll try to make our way as quickly as possible so that I don't get in trouble.
So, Dr. Ginn, in the mid-'60s, the Moynihan Report, Patrick Moynihan said that, what the government is about to do to the African-American family, slavery wasn't able to do. And we know now that in order for a young lady to get help through our system, there's a clause that says she can't have a husband or a man living in the house. Is there a way that we can fix that? Here's my question mark. Is there a way that we can fix that, or and TPPF, are we working on that? Could you tell them a little bit about some of the things we're doing from a policy standpoint to address that issue?
Yeah, so it is a major issue, and you're right. I mean, it's basically the government has become the head of the household, right? It's incentivized people not to get married. And no way. Along with the criminal justice system, because so many people end up getting incarcerated, right? So you got both of these double whammies going on. So this marriage penalty influences not only our taxes that we pay in the marriage, if married, but also on the safety net side. And so that's something else that we need to look at. We've been looking at doing some of those things. One of those ideas is what we're calling an empowerment account. We came out with a paper that last week that's trying to streamline a lot of these programs into one, so that way you don't have all these different bureaucracies and costs and everything else, but also help to start to streamline some of the eligibility criteria as well. It's an uphill battle because there's still a lot of federal rules and waivers and everything else you got to get, but we're hoping we can at least get something started with a pilot program here in Texas to get things started in a better direction, so that we can overcome some of these eligibility issues, connect with the community navigators, not case managers, but community navigators. Also, if you're on this program, if you save money, you get to keep it when you get off. You don't just lose it. So it incentivizes savings, and it's tied to a financial app. So that way people can actually see where the money is going to learn some financial literacy along the way. It's not a cure-all. It's not going to be something that's a utopia, but it's got to be something better than what we're doing today, because if not, we're going to end up doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, which is the definition of insanity. There we go. So we have some good stuff going along there, those lines.
Got a question over here.
Dr. Ginn, question for you. So I'm a financial advisor, and in our world, 10% are minorities. CFP, which is the top designation you can get, certified financial planner, 3% are minority. And I think that goes hand in hand with the financial literacy. So what are your thoughts, or what are ways to combat that and spread more financial literacy?
I think a big part of that is going to be school choice. I think we need to start educating people earlier on about the importance of math, economics, finance. I mean, the system that we have today, if you're looking at just government schools, it does a disservice a lot of times to math, finance, and economics. The changes that they just tried to make I don't think those are happening now, but they were trying to make some changes from the State Board of Education to the curriculum on the TEKS. They were trying to remove a lot of the free enterprise stuff that TPF fought back on and provided some information on. I don't know where that's all at just yet, but what you're seeing in a lot of these government schools is not heading in a good direction, and we need that, you know, in the minority areas, in the urban areas, maybe more than ever. And I think that having a system of school choice and the ability for you to choose would help out a lot. And maybe even looking at reducing some of the licensing that takes place so people can get into CFPs. Because, I mean, there's a lot of tests and everything else and time that some people don't have with money and with their family. And so that's something else maybe to look at.
Can I say something real quick about that? Because most communities of color are underbanked or have no banks. And because of redlining and the history of banks in the black community specifically, there's an adversarial relationship. Yeah. And so why would I go into finance when they have been an oppressor to me? It feels like, right? I mean, there's history to that. And so I wanted to mention this because David with JP Morgan Chase, we're opening the first inner city bank in the country. And it's a bank custom designed to our neighborhood. If you think about it, banks exist for people that, thank you. If you think about it, banks exist for people that have money. We don't have it yet. But instead of treating us like charity, they've created, coming down and done listening sessions, that there's a suite of products, 15 products, that are remedial in nature, that treat us as an emerging market, as a future customer. And so JP Morgan Chase is the backbone of that, and so it's replicable and scalable. They've worked with 9 other regional banks because it's bigger, it's too much for one bank to chew, but wherever it goes and scales beyond Bonton, JP Morgan Chase would be the backbone and work with other local regional banks and other communities. But all of our banks and all of our economic enterprises have internships and that exposure to the financial industry, because if you don't have a bank there, how do I even know what it is? And so I think that's a huge part of it as well.
Well, that is our time for this panel. Thank you all so much for being here with us. Again, help us thank our wonderful panelists today.
While they're, we have a short period if you guys want to step out for the bathroom while they're doing photos. We're going to be very quickly right into our next panel. So as they wrap up, take this bathroom break moment, and then I'll introduce our next panelist. All right, we're going to jump into our next panel. So, ladies and gentlemen, our next moderator, Aaron Valdez. Aaron, actually, I'll give you a brief story. When I was an intern here, I got to spend a lot of time with Aaron as we developed our State of the Young Worker tour. And what we did was we tried to take a critical look at the opportunities and obstacles for the upcoming graduate and give tips on what the legislation, what the business owners, what the community could do to support and make sure we're giving opportunity to the next generation of students, young workers. So Erin was a big part of my education in that process. Erin is a policy director for Next Generation Texas at TPPF. She joined the foundation. Since joining the foundation, Valdez has conducted research on career and technical education at the secondary and post-secondary levels, civic education and welfare to work programs in Texas. Prior to the foundation, Erin taught for over a decade in Austin area schools and served as an assistant principal at charter schools in Louisville. She earned an MA in classics from the University of California, Santa Barbara, and a BA in classical studies for Hisdale. So, without further ado, please give a round of applause for our moderator, Erin Valdez.
Thank you, George. I'm so glad you're permanently at the foundation. It was a pleasure working with you during your internship. We're honored to have some of the best interns in the world here. So if you know of anybody, please send them to us. We have 3 internship classes a year, and we're always looking for talented young people. So just want to put a plug in for that. So our panelists today. This panel is on higher education, but the way I like to think about higher education is it's one of many pathways to prosperity, right? For some students, it looks like a 4-year degree. For other students, it looks like other post-secondary options, trade schools, community colleges, other options that lead to success. And I'll tell you a little bit about why this issue matters so much to me. I was born and raised in Central Florida in a trailer park, and I grew up in a trailer park. My parents didn't go to college. My parents were both very intelligent, wonderful people. They loved their kids. They homeschooled us before it was actually really legal in Florida. So, born an outlaw. My father went to HVA school at night, and that was his ticket to the middle class. He worked really, really hard all of my childhood. Eventually, he did end up at Walmart Stores Incorporated as a manager there, but it took a while. And so because of that, I really believe strongly in the power of hard work and the power of parents to make the right decisions for their family. And I also believe that sometimes a 4-year degree might not be the pathway that everybody wants to take, but we need to make sure that all pathways are available to everyone. And so with that in mind, I'd like to welcome up my guests. My first guest, and I'm just so honored that he's here, is James Douglas, JD. Dr. Douglas is the co-founder of the Urban Resource and Research Center at Thurgood Marshall School of Law, Texas Southern University. His responsibilities there include academic and administrative leadership, leading and managing law school operations, advancing a vision for the school's future, fundraising, and sustaining partnerships and strong relationships with alumni of the law school and the university. He earned his BA in mathematics from TSU and the Juris Doctorate from the Thurgood Marshall School of Law, magna cum laude. I'd like for you to welcome up Dr. Douglas. My second distinguished guest is Jared Toussaint. I got to know Jared when he was at the Texas Education Agency, and we had some great conversations about career and technical education and pathways for students, and I'm just so honored to have him here. He is now the Senior VP for Education and Workforce at the Dallas Regional Chamber. In this capacity, he leads the Dallas Thrive Initiative and supports a wide range of programs supporting Dallas area employers with talent development pipelines. He completed both his master's in public administration and business administration at Rutgers University and earned his undergraduate degree from the P.2 honors program at UT Austin. During that time, he served some of the lowest income cities in the country, spending 4 years as the development director for Teach for America, New Jersey, 3 years as executive director of Citizen Schools in Newark, and then as Newark Mayor Cory Booker's senior education advisor. Please join me in welcoming Jared Toussaint to the stage. And finally, I am excited to welcome my colleague, Dr. Andrew Gillen. Dr. Gillen is a senior policy advisor here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. He works on our Next Generation Texas initiative, which is our education team. He's an adjunct professor of economics at Johns Hopkins University. His recent work is focused on how to reform federal financial aid, how state disinvestment is a myth, and how post-college earnings and debt should be used to inform student choice and government accountability. Prior to joining the foundation, Gillen spent over a decade at nonprofit and philanthropic organizations researching and trying to improve higher education. He was also on the U.S. Department of Education's Advisory Committee on Student Financial Assistance. He has his Ph.D. in economics from Florida State University and a BBA from Ohio University. So come on up, Andrew. So as I mentioned, the way I like to think about higher education is that it is a door, right? It's one of many doors students can take to live a thriving, prosperous life, which is ultimately what we want. One of the things that has really come up over the past few years is, there's been a narrative about higher education, its necessity, and that's all very true for a lot of students. But what we've seen is some downside, and one of the downsides is a lot of student debt, and that's been in the news quite a bit recently, as you are probably aware, with the Biden administration's decision to forgive up to $20,000 of student debt. So critics of this approach, they have many objections, but the focus of this panel is actually going to be on how to address the underlying structural issues that lead to the rising costs of higher education and higher student loan balances, and then what can be done about that. Because ultimately, the rising cost of higher education is an obstacle to students living thriving lives in many cases. And so what do we need to do to bring those costs down and provide more opportunities for students? And so with that in mind, I'd like to turn my first question over to Dr. Gillen and just ask, in your research and in all the many conversations you've had with folks in the space, could you just give us kind of a high-level overview of, maybe why higher education has kept going up with other services maybe not going up as much, and kind of some of the driving factors you see there?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we've slowly realized over the years is that higher education is really dominated by public and private nonprofit institutions, and those are mission-driven organizations. And so there's not really a limit to how much they're willing and able to spend. If you double their budget, they'll spend it. If you have their budget, they'll spend it. So they're going to spend whatever is available. And what that means is that you can't really buy more college affordability by giving them more money, because they're going to treat every different revenue stream almost as an independent source of revenue. So they're going to try to max out state support. They're going to try to max out philanthropic support. They're going to try to commercialize research. They're going to do all that full steam ahead at the same time that they're going to charge as much as they can to the students. And so once you realize that, it really makes you start to think, okay, how can we restructure the way we're financing colleges so that we aren't just feeding this beast? Because there is a certain amount that the schools need to be able to provide a good education. But once you're at that level, they aren't going to stop there. They're going to keep going and going and going. And you can see this obviously at the Ivy League schools, like the schools with the $1 billion endowments, millions of dollars endowments per student. They're still spending all that money. There's an article earlier this week. Yale now has more administrators than they do students. Yeah, so there's clearly no limit to how much they're going to spend. And the thing is, every college wants to be just like Yale, right? So we've got to stop feeding the beast if we ever want to make college affordable.
It's a really good factoid. I'm going to use that. Thank you, Andrew. It's kind of shocking, but not too surprising. I think all of us have seen just in a lot of organizations kind of a growing administrative overhead kind of eating away at the price of everything. So I'd like to turn the next question over to you, Dr. Douglas. Your leadership at Texas Southern University is legendary. You've inspired so many young people to lives of service. I've spoken to many of them, and they speak glowingly of you. Could you reflect for us a little bit on TSU's role in providing pathways to economic mobility for students, and what are some of the lessons you've learned along the way that can maybe help inform policymakers about this issue of rising costs?
I think since we're talking about workforce and economics, we ought to take a look at how we got to where we are. If you go back to the founding of the country, and you talked about Yale, when America was founded, because we're based on the British system, the only people who really took part in higher education was the very wealthy. All right, so college was not for normal, everyday people, and there was no real relationship between a college degree and work. All right, because education was not a part of work. In fact, most people don't realize, even though in history we say, well, the slaves by law could not learn to read and write. But at the end of the Civil War, 70% of the white people in the South were illiterate. So education was not important even to white people in the South. And in fact, most of public education in the South did not start until after the Civil War. All right, so we've got a situation now, and one of the reasons was because prior to the Civil War, we were strictly agricultural in the South. Now, people have to learn to do things that are not on the farm. Also, because of the British system, if you look at, quote, the Ivy League schools, Harvard, Yale, and all of that, they were all private. All right? The beginning of this country, higher education, college education was all private. The first public education was started in the South. Georgia, North Carolina, William and Mary. All right? There's some fight over which one of them was actually first. All right? But this is when we decided that because we're coming out of the Civil War, we've got to do something different in terms of the workforce, and we have to start training people at a higher level. So now we don't have a lot of wealthy people. So in order to create higher education, we had to do it collectively. And so higher education, public higher education started in the South. Right, so what do? One of the things you have to realize, how do we get to where we are? I'll look back. In 1960, there were about 5 million people enrolled in four-year colleges. By 70, there were a little over 7 million. In 2020, there were over 20 million. All right. So now why do we see this big change? Well, one of the reasons we saw the big change, and I remember when I got out of high school in the early 60s, and I decided I wanted to go to college. And my father, I was blessed. I had two of the greatest parents in the world. My father worked in a steel mill. So the summer after my first year in college, I worked in a steel mill. My manager had a mechanical engineering degree. And he asked me one day, why do you want to always go back to school? You can't make this kind of money even when you get out. And he was telling the truth. Because at that time, people didn't go to college to make money. People went to college because it was something they wanted to do. My reasons, as I told him, is I have to have a transferable skill. He'd say, what in the hell is a transferable skill? I said, I don't intend to spend all of my life in Houston. I have to have a skill set that I can take with me wherever I go. I said, you've been with the company for 25 years. You're making a whole lot of money. We have a plant in Kansas City. If you left here and went to Kansas City tomorrow, you'd have to start at the ground floor. I want a job that when I move around, I don't lose my level of wages. You lose your level of wages, so you don't have a transferable skill. That's why those 6,000 people went to college in 1970. What happens now? We look in the 80s, we started losing all of those manufacturing jobs. They no longer exist. We went to college back then because we wanted to do something different. It wasn't just about making money. It wasn't about making a living. The 20 million people who go to college now go because they want to make a living, a livable resource. So we have a different set of students who are going to college. All right. It means now colleges have to transition into how they approach these students. And I always tell newcomers to TSU, unlike when I went to school, when people went because they wanted to go, now you have people going to college because they believe they have to go. And because people doing things not because they want to do it, but because they have to do it, it requires more motivation on the part of the faculty member. So you have to get a lot of people involved. As Doc said just a minute ago, when I went to college in the early 60s, there was a fight between Texas and California. And the fight was to see which state could provide the lowest college experience for its population. So Texas and California always tried to make college education almost zero. All right? I got a law degree, and I never paid more than $150 a semester. All right? Almost $150 a semester. All right, now, if I went to UT tomorrow, it'd be about $45,000 a year to get a law degree. So things have changed because as we've seen the number of people going to college increase from about 5 million to 20 million. We've also seen the legislators in the various states decrease funding. That is, the more important college education became, the less it's been supported. All right, so now when people need to go to college, it costs an astronomical amount of money to go. All right, now you ask what happens to this increase, and we talked about this the other day. As I told you, there are three things that cause the increase. As Doc said, one is the increase in administration. At Texas Southern, I joke with people because they say, why does it cost so much now? There's one building on campus, it's called Hannah Hall. I said, when I was a student at Texas Southern, all right, 4/5 of every person that worked on this campus worked in Hannah Hall. Every college in the school was in Hannah Hall. Central administration was in Hannah Hall. All right, now, where are we now in 2022. We have a separate building for the law school, which used to be in Hannah Hall. We have a separate building for the School of Business, which used to be in Hannah Hall. We have a separate building for public affairs, all right, which used to be in Hannah Hall. We have arts and science that shares, we have liberal arts that shares the public affairs building. That used to be in Hannah Hall. We have a science building. That used to be in Hannah Hall. All right? We have a facilities shop that used to be in Hannah Hall. Now, all of that used to be in Hannah Hall. You know what's in Hannah Hall now? Central administration. That's all. There's nothing in Hannah Hall but administration. There was an interesting report that came out recently because of the increase in cost. All right, everybody thinks the increase in cost went to faculty salaries. The answer is no. The increase in cost went to central administration. It costs more. Now, why does it cost more? For a number of reasons. One, student demand. All right, students come now and they demand more. It doesn't matter whether it's housing. When I was a freshman, we had 4 people in a room. Now every student wants their own room, all right, and it can't be small because they have computers, they have televisions, they want Wi-Fi, they want everything. So it's student demand. And so it's a lot that goes into the increase. So we've had 1, the increase in cost, and 2, the reduction in support from central administration. And so it's a lot that leads us to where we are today. And it's unfortunate that at a time when higher education is most important, we get the least amount of support.
We're gonna talk a little bit more about the funding side and some interesting innovations there and what can be done there. But I want to turn it over to Mr. Toussaint. And you and I first met when you were at TEA, and I just was always struck by the fact that you really cared about students and you had a real vision for connecting students to great successful pathways. Now in your work at the Dallas Chamber, you're working directly with employers. So, to kind of pick up on what Dr. Douglas was just mentioning, can you reflect for us a little bit on what you're hearing from employers about, either the secondary system or the post-secondary system, and are they getting what they hope they're getting, and what can these institutions do better to help students?
Yep. And thank you for the question, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to it and to join the panelists here today. I think the disconnect really begins, and for a lot of employers and for a lot of businesses, they don't really see the distinction between K-12 and post-secondary. They're not as attuned to what's happening. They're more interested in the final product. But if we take a step back and look at what's happening, we, as a state, as you know, have essentially organized, particularly our K-12 instruction, around largely 2 tracks. There's a third, but it's largely 2 tracks: college readiness and career readiness. And then, oh, by the way, military readiness. And because we essentially bifurcated in that manner, what you see is a large disparity in outcomes depending upon the path that students take, but a lot of holes in those pathways. So for instance, in Dallas, 90% of all of our kids are graduated from high school, including our African American population. Fast forward in a post-secondary enrollment, we're now talking about 60% of our kids who are enrolled in some type of our African American kids in our region who are enrolled in some type of post-secondary program. About 30% of them will walk away with some type of credential, and about 10% of them will then take that credential and make at least a living wage in the workforce. So through that system, from K-12 through post-secondary into the most meaningful aspect, which is what employers are looking for. Do I have someone who can take this unfilled job, which right now in Texas, there are thousands that provide livable, meaningful wages that large segments of our society and young adults are just not prepared for. So you go from 90% high school graduation to 10% who have a degree or a credential and are making a living wage. For businesses, what they basically are getting are students who are either supposed to be college ready or supposed to be career ready. But what they're in effect looking for is both, because it's the transferability of those skills, and they know that labor markets iterate, their needs iterate. Many of them are thinking about this not in just the context of Dallas and not in just the context of North Texas, and not in just the context of Texas, but as a global market, essentially. And so that disconnect, where we essentially, as a state, and even at our post-secondary levels, we determine that it's both. That's probably too hard for a kid to attain. So we're going to have you pick one or the other. And that is most profound and significant in communities of color. Because what they tell you is college or advanced degrees or high skill, probably not for you. But we've got these great vocational programs that you can take advantage of. And what that leaves out, not to say that those vocational programs aren't meaningful, is that what happens when that industry changes? What happens when that kid changes their mind? What happens when they're looking for other types of opportunities to advance? The college rigor that was taken out of their instructional design and their plan is essentially a limitation now for that student. And so if you look at the state measures essentially the 11 indicators of every graduate who graduates from our high school to say, did you meet one of these 11 to say that you are something in the realm of college and career military readiness? We have indicators that if you meet the career indicator is actually negative correlation to your success in college, and vice versa. There are college measures that a kid can meet that actually do not set them up primarily for success in the workforce were they to choose that route immediately after graduation. So employers are really getting a what I'll call an unfinished product. And what they believe and what I believe that they're looking for is a completely sort of holistically trained student, young adult talent that has met the basic rigor, reading, math, and all of the other aspects of the hard skills, and has had some exposure to the technical skills that are required in a 21st century learning or a workforce. And then they want to know that there's some employability skills that have been created and met as well. And right now, we largely are giving students one of those aspects before they graduate, but not all three.
Thank you for that. So one of the things that I often think about is perhaps part of that dichotomy that you're talking about has to do with the fact that we think that skilled trades aren't rigorous. Does that make sense? So like I mentioned, my dad was an HVAC repairman, and he told me that when he was in high school, he never really got algebra. He couldn't think that way. It's one of the reasons he didn't end up going to college. But when he started his HVAC work, he said all of a sudden, all that math started to make sense. And then he got an algebra book and he was like, oh, I see how this works now. They came together for him. And it turns out he ended up loving math and science, like as a hobby, right? And so I would just say sort of part of this is this idea that the skilled trades are not rigorous perhaps plays into the idea that students don't need these things. Perhaps the way we're teaching them, we need to have a more of an application focus, you know.
I totally agree. There is an element here, and that we have to also speak to, which I mentioned. George W. Bush used to call it the soft bigotry of low expectations, where we believe that there are populations, and particularly black and brown students of color, who, you know what, you're not going to be a doctor, you're not going to be an engineer, you're not going to be a lawyer, but this job is one that is fitting for you. And there is meaning, and there is wage potential, and there is advancement opportunity in the vocational field. But when you're thinking about this as a 14-year-old, number one, do you even know what that looks like and what those opportunities are? And number two, is that a decision that you are prepared to make and then stick to, essentially, as it relates to the other opportunities that you have? But if you increase and add that relevance and give that exposure, number one, you're going to allow kids to start checking off some things that they don't want to do. We talk to students all the time who are in healthcare programs. They see blood, I'm out. They're in the manufacturing, and they have to go up on heights, scared of heights, I'm gone. If you've gone through 4 years of training, got a credential, and that's when you get that experience, that is wasted cost and time for both that student. So there's value to that, but there's also value, as you mentioned, to the increased engagement of a rigorous career relevant instruction that says what I'm learning in this classroom applies to something else, the dots connect, my engagement goes up, and I connect more to the outcomes.
I really love that. I want to turn it over to you, Dr. Gillen, real quick, and then we'll kind of make another round here, unless you have something to add there, Dr. Douglas.
I want to say something going, and I think it's because we have lost our real goal of education. And I go through this with my first year students every year. And I say, what is the purpose of an education? What should you want to get out of an educational experience? And they all come up with all kind of ideas, and I think this goes back to something we talked about in terms of the advent of the computer, and we become information-based learners. But I said to them, the real reason for going to school is not to learn a particular piece of information. It is to learn how to learn. And if you know how to learn, even when you transfer from one profession to another, you know how to learn to do what it is. If you're just stuck on regurgitation, then you're right. You're not going to be prepared for this change in society, since right now they say we're going to have 6 or 7 different types of jobs in a lifetime. So we need to stop teaching people how to do a specific thing and teach them how to learn whatever it is they need to know going forward.
I want to talk a little bit about the role of some of the data you've analyzed, Dr. Gillen. So some of your work has focused on new data that the Department of Education has put out on the earnings of certain programs and certain colleges. And so these data tell us something about programs that we've never really had before. And one of the things that I found fascinating about the work that you've done is it's not always predictable which majors are going to end up being the most valuable or not. And I think it kind of touches on some of this work. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that, some of the big surprises from that research, some of the overarching themes you've seen from that, and how that can help policymakers and even parents and students make decisions about what next steps they're going to take in their post-secondary career.
Yeah, absolutely. So about 3 years ago, the U.S. Department of Education started releasing program-level data. So what this means is that you can now look up, the bachelor's and nursing degree students from UT Austin. What's their typical debt? What's their typical earnings after they graduate? So before, we've never really had this data, at least at the national level. Some states, including Texas, actually did a pretty good job prior to this, but now we've got it nationally for all universities in the country. What this allows us to do is ask much better questions than we used to be, because it used to be, well, is college worth it? It's kind of a silly question. That's like saying, is food worth it? Well, yeah, you need to eat something, but like, should you eat the apple or should you eat the chocolate cake? Like, we need a little bit more information about their nutritional value, these two things. And what this program level data gives us is that more fine-grained information. So now we can identify programs where students are predictably graduating with excessive debt, which means they're basically not going to be able to afford to repay their student loans. And like Aaron said, this is introducing huge surprises. So one of the schools, so we're going to have a report out in a couple weeks that looks at all the public programs in Texas, and it says, how many of these programs, meaning a master's degree in music at UT Austin or whatever, cannot afford to repay this. Guess what school has the number 2 most programs that fail this test, meaning their students cannot repay their student loans? With apologies to Rudy, it's UT Austin. And that's surprising, right? Because one of the other stories that's been in the news lately is UT Austin is now the richest school in the country. They have the biggest endowment out of anybody. So this isn't about resources. This is not about UT Austin being bad. UT Austin's a great school. But they've got these 8 problematic programs that are simply priced too high relative to the value they're delivering for their students. So what we're trying to do is come up with accountability mechanisms and transparency mechanisms that, number one, provide students and parents with the information to make wise choices when they're choosing majors and when they're choosing schools. So now the question isn't, should I go to UT Austin? It's, should I go to UT Austin and major in one of these 8 really risky areas? Versus, and then on the accountability side, it's, should the state continue to provide support for those programs that are predictably failing a lot of their students? And so there aren't many of these. So there's really only 58 programs that we've identified in Texas that we think are like huge red flags for students. But we're still talking thousands of students every year. And the fields are surprising. So I wrote some of this down. So at the top of the list, most associates and bachelor's degrees are actually pretty safe. So if you're doing community college or bachelor's degree, you're generally pretty safe. Master's degree gets a little risky, and then professional and doctoral degrees, over half of both of those categories are going to fail this test, or at least be close to failing. Professional degrees are extremely risky. 2 of the fields that really surprised us that really are overrepresented on this list, no offense, law and dentistry. Now, again, this doesn't mean that these schools are producing bad lawyers and bad dentists. It just means that they're charging too much for the students are taking on too much debt to go in these programs. So we need to get a reset between the value that the students are getting out of these programs and how much the schools are extracting them from them, particularly in terms of student loans.
That's really helpful. My husband's a lawyer. He was not surprised by this data at all. Just say that. So I wanted to just kind of bring it back around to you, Dr. Douglas, and thinking about why students choose TSU. You talked a little bit about student demands and what they're looking for. Why do students choose TSU? What are they hoping to get out of it? What are the opportunities you see there to better deliver programs that will meet their needs, not just now, but 15 years from now?
As you know, we're an HBCU, and I think a lot of the students choose us because they think the academic environment is going to be a lot more accommodating to their needs, and actually it is. I remember when I was at Stanford and I was talking to the dean about critical mass and the environment that the African American students found themselves in that environment. And I said to him, do you realize that a lot of times I'm sitting in a class of 130 people I'm the only African American in the class. And I can't think about labor law, because I'm sitting there thinking, what kind of society is this that creates an environment where I am the only person in the class? And there is, and this was at a time we weren't even talking about having minorities on the faculty. The big issue then was that there were no women on the faculty. So we offer students who come to us an environment where they see people who look like them, they see people who care about their well-being. So it is actually atmosphere, because one of the things you want to create in higher education and experience is an environment that's conducive to learning. And so I tell people when I'm recruiting is we take all of those outside issues away. So the only thing on your plate when you're there for the 4 or 5 years, or even 6 or 7, depending how long you're going to be there, is that the only thing you have to concentrate on is your learning. And that's why people come to Texas Southern University.
That's great. I've heard similar reflections from other folks who've worked out or gone to HBCUs. And in my former role, when I was at the Charles Koch Foundation, we had a very robust partnership with a number of HBCUs, and I had the opportunity to visit Wiley College on a number of occasions in their debate program, and I even got to sit at the table with Denzel Washington once. It was really great because he supported their debate program, and that was a consistent theme that I heard over and over again, and it was amazing what excellence arose from that.
And remember, for the movie, Denzel trained at Texas Southern with our debate coach.
That's right. I do remember that. They were, it was a real point of pride, and it should be. So I want to turn it over to you, Mr. Toussaint, and just talk a little bit about, you talked a little bit about the need for relevance and how that can often make the light bulb come on, when it comes to learning complex topics. And so, in your role or in your past capacities, have you seen some great examples of industry-led or industry partnerships with secondary or higher ed? And can you tell us a little bit about the lessons learned there and, as a model for the rest of the state?
Yeah. I'm contractually obligated to mention the Dallas ISD P.2 network, the Pathways in Technology Early College High School. It's a global model, but North Texas and Dallas specifically has the largest footprint. And what it's enabled, we have 90 industry partners who are partnering with local higher ed institutions and local districts to offer over 30 in-demand pathways. And as of 2020, 13% of associate's degrees attained by high school graduates in the state of Texas came out of Dallas County. One county created 13% of all high school graduates who attained an associate's degree upon high school graduation. What that reflects in my mind is the importance of starting much, much earlier. And even before post-secondary, thinking about secondary, middle school, and quite frankly, early elementary, to begin to infuse all of the aspects of relevance that we were talking about. All the things that are true for a 21-year-old are true for an 18-year-old, a 16-year-old, and an 8-year-old as it relates to the understanding of what the opportunities are that exist and the relationships with folks in an industry with a positive adult. That idea, which is at the sort of the heart of work-based learning, which our P.2 models are geared around, is meant to underscore not just the relevance, not just the rigor, but what is often the missing piece of social capital that many of our young adults and students don't have access to know, I want to be a pharmacy tech, a radiology tech, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a lawyer. Who do I talk to? What does it look like? How do I attain the requisite training and education, and just the networks that really provide the access to all of those things. We want to start that much, much earlier and build it into the design of instruction. If you think about a lot of what happens in terms of work-based learning and a lot of employer engagement, it's really an abutment to the school day. It's an afterthought. So you have 8 to 380 days a year for education, a little bit different for our higher education friends, but that's an agrarian calendar. It makes no sense whatsoever. And so an industry and an employer says, how do I partner in that aspect? I think if we reverse it and think particularly about what the pandemic has taught us, which is that learning can happen in a variety of settings, synchronous, asynchronous, not always with the same quality, but we've got a lot to learn there. But it can also happen across a longer period of time, that can get an extension of the learning day, an extension of the learning year. These are new ways to engage employers, not just in sort of the after-school extracurricular piece, but in the actual design and delivery of instruction. You start that early enough, kids are making much more educated choices in 8th grade and 9th grade, and then as it relates to how they're graduating and what they're graduating with. That has a significant difference on who's coming into higher ed with the preparation and preparedness and the end product. The other side of that I think we all are trying to figure out how to replicate are just apprenticeships. We know that apprenticeships are a highly rigorous method of employability training and workforce development, because it takes those aspects and it's not mutually exclusive. Technical career education or college rigor and exposure. It's both. And employers know that, and they know that the skills that those students are going to retain and develop, and the relationships with their employers that an apprentice will have, is a meaningful inflection point. And so the end product is gold to them. We are right now, amongst our peer states, at the bottom, essentially, of occupations offering an apprenticeship pathway. If we expand that into new fields, IT, healthcare, we can build entirely new pathways. They would be superhighways, in my opinion, to the absolutely most in-demand and high-income industries that we have in our region, with the most rigorous, relevant, and I think most state-of-the-art or up-to-date training that we can provide, but we've got to do a lot more in that space than we do right now as a state.
Dr. Douglas?
Yeah, going back to something you just said, and going back to something I said earlier about learning how to learn. I think we place too much emphasis on asking kids to select what they want to be too early in life. Learning how to learn, to me, I think it's the most important aspect. And I give an example. I'm a lawyer. And you said earlier, I had a background in mathematics. I was also a software analyst. And people always ask me, how did you go from math to law? And I said the answer ought to be, how did I go from law to math? I was a pre-law political science major as a freshman. I hated it. And when I said to the department head of political science that I was changing my major, he said, but I thought you wanted to go to law school. And I said, yeah, I do want to go to law school, but I hate political science. And so I have to get out of undergrad first. Fast forward, I'm in legal education. I find myself on the board of law school admission services. That's the people who do the LSAT, law school admissions test. And one of the board members said one day, you know, we tell people you can major in anything and go to law school. but we've never tried to find out whether one undergrad background prepares you better for law school than any other. And so naturally, as a responsible board, we had the research done. And the shocking information came back. The best undergrad study for law school preparation is mathematics. So we tell people, all right, because sometimes we don't know what the relationship is between all of these. And why? Because lawyers are problem solvers. All right? Lawyers are problem solvers. People who
sometimes
people who major in mathematics come to law school with those already well-developed analytical skills. All right? So I'm saying, see, I think everybody ought to have the same basic high school curriculum. Train them to be whatever they want to be. All right? I mean, you know, I knew I wanted to go to law school. I love math. I took chemistry. I took physics. I took everything. And my counselor would say, why are you taking all this stuff all over the board? I say, because I don't want to paint myself in a corner. This is what I want to be today, but let's assume I decide I want to go to medical school. Or let's assume I decide I want to do this. So I think rather than track our students so early in life the way we're doing now, since we know we're in a transitioning employment world, why are we tracking them? Why don't we prepare them so that as they move through life, they're prepared to do whatever they want to do?
Well, with that, I want to open it up for some audience questions. We have about 10 minutes here, so please raise your hand to ask a question, and Erica will bring you a mic. Thank you. Over here, Dr. Johnson.
Thank you so much. And I want to address this. I want to direct this question to Dr. Douglas with something that was stated earlier in terms of students being able to be exposed to not just liberal arts and sciences, but also the trades and career technology education. The Texas Southern University, along with Prairie View and Wiley and all the HBCUs, back in the 50s, 50s all the way through probably early 80s, used to provide not only the liberal arts and science and teaching, but also industrial technology education. So with that being said, historically black colleges and universities used to address those things, but then somewhere along the way, I think around the late 70s, early 80s, we went straight liberal arts and sciences and dropped the industrial technology schools. Why did that happen, and is it an opportunity to bring that holistic educational approach back, not just to historically black colleges and universities, but across the board?
I agree with you, Richard. I know why it happened, because in the late 70s, early 80s, we decided as a society that everyone in high school ought to be trained for college. For some unknown reason, when we started closing the steel mills and the foundries and all of that, we decided that we were going to be in this society where if you didn't have a college degree, you were going to be able to make it. We didn't realize that technology was going to be with us always, and that you wouldn't always need a 4-year degree to perform a lot of the tasks that we have. So yeah, I agree with you. The HBCUs dropped it, the high schools dropped it. You know, when we were in high school, we had all kind of shops. We had a mechanical shop. I remember Cashmere in my old high school. They had, what do you call it, not beauticians, but cosmetology. They They had everything. So yeah, people could leave with a background in mechanics and go out and get a job. We've taken that away now. So I agree. Hopefully we have learned enough so that we can bring this back into the whole education environment. You know, one of my brothers who was in public education for a long time convinced me, because I was one of those. I remember I was in a group that we used to speak to high school kids about the profession, and my thing was everybody ought to have a college degree. And my brother explained to me, you know, everybody can have a college degree. There are some people who cannot have, who just don't have either the mindset to want it or the finances to get it. And so there ought to be an avenue for them. So I heard the earlier panel, a lot of people are converted later in life to God. Fortunately for me, I was converted very early in life, so I never went through one of those life-changing experiences, but I have been converted to understand the technological issue that some people need to have. So I think that's something that we need to bring back.
Thank you. Over to you, Andrew.
So I have a two-part question. The first part is very in the weeds, and it's directed at Dr. Gillen. The second part is a follow-up that's really for the entire panel. But the first part of the question, you talked about the study earlier that's starting to look into income levels and the ability to pay off student debt, both at an institutional level, by institution, and by program area. You mentioned that UT essentially had the second worst numbers in the country. You also mentioned that professional degrees are very problematic, law school degrees in particular. And as a graduate of UT's law school, I'm a little more scared today than I was when I first walked in the door. My question about that has to do with the data collection. UT's made efforts to collect that data through, there's been an effort the last few years by UT to collect that data using census data. I work for Texas State Technical College. We get that data from unemployment insurance wage records from the Texas Workforce Commission. Can you speak to how that data was collected for that study? The follow-up for the entire panel is, how do you see that refocusing higher ed, both here in Texas and nationally, if at all, in the years ahead?
So this is one of the advantages of the U.S. Department of Education data, because Texas, like I said, had been actually at the forefront of kind of collecting this data. The problem was it was coming from unemployment records, which meant that if a graduate from a Texas university left Texas, they disappeared from the system. With the U.S. data, that doesn't happen anymore. So as long as they stay within the country, and even if they go overseas, if they still pay taxes, they'll still be collected in the system. So the essentially where the U.S. Department of Education is getting this data is from IRS. So essentially tax records. So if you cheat on your taxes, yeah, that might throw off the numbers, but they'll also send people after you for that. So I don't recommend doing that. So what was the second part of the question?
The second part of the question is, how do you see that reshaping education?
Yeah, and so I really think that this new approach is going to be revolutionary. Like Dr. Douglas said, we live in a different time now. Like, it used to be you went to college because you had a calling, you were just curious about something. Now you go to get a job. 90% of students now say they go to college to earn more money or to get a career bump, something along those lines. So we're living in the world where the purpose of college, at least for the students, has changed quite dramatically. What I think that this data is going to do, and this data doesn't touch on learning at all, which I think is a huge blind spot, right? Like, what we really want to know if a college is good or if a program is good is how much are the students learning. We have no idea. But we can tell you what happens to them in the labor market. And that is also a very important question. I think learning is more important, but it's a blind spot. We just don't have any information on it. We can tell you what happens in the labor market. And I think that that's going to have a revolutionary impact in two ways. So one is just the consumer information. So right now, a lot of students are sort of being led like lemmings off a cliff. They're just saying, oh, well, everybody's been telling me to go to college. My high school teachers and guidance counselors are pushing me towards it, so I'm going to do it. They get there, they don't know what to do. They gravitate towards a field, a major that doesn't prepare them well. Maybe they drop out. Like there's a lot of ways to fail if you just have this kind of college for all mentality and just go without knowing what you want to do. So I think the consumer information aspect of this is going to be quite revolutionary, because now we can put like danger signs up on those paths, right? So it's not going to block it off. Like if I just really have my heart set on going to UT Law School for some unknown reason, I know a lot of you in this room have done that.
It's a very good school. It's a graduate.
So like you can by all means do that, but for the people who didn't know that was potentially risky, we need to let them know that up front. The other aspect that this does that I think is also going to be revolutionary is it's going to let us start using accountability metrics. So right now, if you look at how we hold colleges accountable at the federal level, it's just the cohort default rate, which means do 40% of your students default on their student loans. 40%. Now, you can also get cut off if 30% of your students default on their student loans for like 3 years. But think about that. 30% of your students defaulting on their student loans, like that's a joke to begin with, in terms of actually holding schools accountable. And one of the problems was that this was applied at the institution level. And so what happens if you fall on the wrong side of that 30%? We cut off all your funding for student loans, for Pell Grants. There's not there's not a school in the country that could survive being cut off from those programs if they're currently taking them. There's a handful of schools right now that don't take them, but they didn't start taking them and they then get them taken away. So like, so you take that away, pretty much any school is gonna close up shop as a result of that. Well, you don't need to do that with this program level data. You just identify the problem programs, because guess what? Even at UT Austin, so I picked on them, and point of clarification, it wasn't second worst in the country, it was second worst in Texas. And it wasn't worst in terms of relative performance, because they have a ton of programs, so they have a lot more programs, so it makes sense that they'd have more failures. But so second most failing programs in Texas is how I'd state that. Like, we don't need to cut off all UT Texas or UT Austin's funding. We just need to cut off funding for those 8 programs that are failing. And so when you do that, you're not threatening all the successful programs. You're just identifying the problematic ones and targeting those.
Turn it over to you, Dr. Douglas, and then over to you, Jared.
I was going to say, Doc, unless the Department of Education steps in, I don't think it's going to have any difference at all, because you asked an 18-year-old, they know where they want to go to school, and they're going to want to go as long as they can get the financing to go where they want to go. I give an example. I asked a guy when I was at Stanford, and I discovered he had gotten into, give you a crazy story. I've taught at 3 public universities and 2 private universities, and gone to public and private universities. So I asked this guy when I discovered he had gotten into UT Berkeley. I was at Stanford because they were paying for it, but he was paying. He was paying for going to Stanford, and I said, why wouldn't you go to Berkeley? I mean, why would you pay all of this money to go to Stanford when you could go to Berkeley? I didn't see any difference in the quality or the reputation of the 2 law schools, but he did. And his parents had the money to pay, and so he paid. I mean, I can tell you the students that go to these high-priced schools, they go because they want to go. I mean, that's where they want to go. I mean, I've seen students struggle to go to a high-priced private school when they could go free to a public school. But I don't think that information is going to make any difference. If they want to go to UT, they're going to UT.
That's a good point. So I think what we've got to do then is a better job of educating students. It sounds like partially some of what Jared's talking about in terms of the advising and getting students ready for those decisions, right, in high school. So Jared, what are your thoughts on this?
Just really briefly, I think the big change is going to be, and it's already starting to happen, but largely K-12 and post-secondary are playing an enrollment game. We want butts in seats because that's more money. So it's an input-based process. The shift that K-12 in Texas has started to move toward is being outcomes-based, so that we're not concerned with how many butts that you get into seats, which is largely just a function of, do I have enough popular programs to attract you based upon what you are going to be interested in, not what's best for your long-term educational or career prospects. Two-year institutions are starting to feel that same pressure. TSTC was essentially the state's first foray into saying, we're moving entirely away from that. And that model is now beginning to cross over into, I think, all of two-year instruction. I think 4 years, from what we're hearing, will certainly be subject to some of those same pressures and accountability. And that's going to be uncomfortable for a while, because what it's going to mean is that as a parent and as a student, you're no longer going to be met or communicated about what you are interested in, but more kind of what you need. So less sugar and ice cream and more broccoli and kale. And that's not sexy and it's not fun. And I think that is going to be a process you see it right now in the decline in student enrollment. You see it right now in the value of college and higher education. And they don't know about the prospects of HVAC, plumbing, and many of the middle skill trades that they can go to college for and receive a living wage employment and then advance that into a 4-year degree, advanced degree, and beyond if they choose to. That is going to be very uncomfortable for all of us in this space for a while until we essentially are on the other side of that shift.
Thank you. That was beautiful. I want to turn it over here for one last question. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Kelly Kieschnick. I work for Senator Larry Taylor. We have seen that there's a big middle skills gap in the workforce in Texas. So meaning people who don't have some post-secondary credential, but not necessarily a bachelor's degree. I think community colleges can do a lot to help in that space. Yet during the pandemic, there was a big drop in community college attendance. And that's also, community colleges also serve the largest number of Black and brown and low income students in the state. Right now, the Commission for Community College Finance has been working on potential reform. I wanted to hear from the panel what your thoughts are on, I guess, what is the need for reform? Why is that so important right now? And what you think the chances are of something like that passing in the upcoming session, what the obstacles might be?
I'll kick it off and then turn it over to our panelists. We have been following the Commission's work, and we've seen some draft recommendations come out of that. We were heartened to see the outcomes-based funding be the first set of recommendations. I will, just speaking for us, and we're going to put out a piece on this in more detail, but it really matters how you define outcomes. So an outcome is something that the institution doesn't directly control. So graduation rates are actually more of an output from the institution and not an outcome of the institution. And so you need a third party sort of validation for the value of that education, which is why we like labor market data and earnings, and whether that's from the UI wage record system or the tax record system. You need some sort of way to validate that, because otherwise institutions have really strong incentives to game the system. especially if there's a lot of money at stake. And so we're cautiously optimistic about the outcomes-based funding being a focus there, but we'd really want to make sure that it's measuring the right outcomes and measuring them in a way that incentivizes the institutions to move in the right direction for students. And then the other piece there is they're looking for some base funding, essentially, which is concerning because their enrollment's fallen about 12% since fall of 2019. I predict that by the time session rolls around, it'll be closer to 15. Labor market pressure is part of that, for sure. But we haven't seen equivalent declines in, say, TSDC's enrollment, which indicates that it might not be all about labor market pressure there. So just want to throw that out there. We're going to be putting out some more detailed recommendations around that, but that's just our 2 cents, and I can turn it over to our guests to weigh in as well.
I think we have one more, but if you want to answer.
I want to give our guests a chance to weigh in on that because it's a good question. Yeah, good.
So I put on my economist hat here, and one of the things that I think is severely undervalued in a lot of government programs is competition. So you can have competition even among nonprofits, even among public institutions. But when you look at the way we fund, particularly community colleges, we're going to give you a local monopoly, and then we're going to give the money to the institution. And then we're going to hope that you do what the students need you to do. As an economist, I'm like, whoa, that's completely backwards. Number one, we don't have any competition among the institutions, so there's no competitive pressure. Number two, their main stakeholder is the state government, not the student that they're supposed to be serving. So the solution from the economist perspective is give the money to the student and open it up to competition. So I don't care if Texas Tech wants to offer associate's degrees. If they're going to do a better job than the local community college, they should be allowed to. So it shouldn't require a new piece of statute to allow an institution to offer education. If students are willing to pay for that, then obviously there's market need for it.
Go ahead.
A few years ago, the Commission of Higher Education came out with a report and said only about 20% of the students who graduate from high school in Texas are college ready. I don't think you can solve that problem until you solve the problem K through 12. If the schools are not graduating students who are not college ready, then they're not prepared for college. A lot of them who feel they have to go, even though they are not prepared, are not going to be successful. I always tell people, because a lot of people who go to college, when that almost 14 million who are going to college now, who wasn't going to college in 1970, a lot of those don't want to go. They're going because they believe they have to go. And I tell people all the time, my granddaddy always told me, boy, you can't win a race with a horse that doesn't want to run. And so you have all these students in this college race that don't want to be there. And you can't win with them.
Jared, I'm going to let you have the last word.
Yeah, we're optimistic. The regional chamber's been very involved. We've met with, I think, most of the commission members, with our individual employers and business champions. We're optimistic from what we've heard from the chairman, from the legislators, that they're going to be prepared to make what we believe is a historic investment in a 2-year college system. With the $27 billion surplus, we believe the imperative is now to do so. That a lot of that funding we think is going to go to shifting from just enrollment to outcomes, workforce outcomes as well, transfer into 4-year institutions and incentives for that. Weighting of students based upon the type of demographic that they come from, because we know it takes different resources to educate students depending upon where they're from. And quite frankly, the current state financing system for two-year colleges does not provide that differentiation. So giving more funding to students who need more supports, and then being able to then allow institutions to invest more in the wraparound supports, because as you mentioned, we know that many of those students that they're serving are Black, brown, and low income. So transportation, child care, access to earning opportunities while they're in school. These are all things that community colleges have been trying to do and have been doing with some success under their own volition for a long time without the state's support. We believe the state will finally make an investment in that. There's going to be a lot of competing priorities, obviously, and a lot of competing social issues in the next session that are going to take a lot of space, and we're not sure how much of that is going to impact how much of the legislation will get across the finish line, but we know the leadership is supportive of it, and we thank Chairman Taylor for his work, and we'll miss him in what he's done to get us to this point.
One last question. Thank you.
So thank you everyone on this panel. It's been a wonderful day. Dr. Douglas had a quick question for you. And I was an economics major some 30 some odd years ago, and I co-founded the Florida program for school choice. So I'm trying to tie these together. The HBCUs, this conversation of educational choice, the K through 12 conversation would be incredible to be had at the HBCUs across Texas. There are more HBCUs in the state than any other state as far as I know. And I was wondering if there's anything you could do to help facilitate those conversations with some of these HBCUs, because I think we're the last one to know about things that benefit us. And I think that if we can get to education aspects of the HBCUs and have these conversations on the premises, and we can do a couple of these around the state, I think it would go a long way to help with a knowledge of what educational choice is, what it's not, and how it could benefit.
Be happy to help.
Great. Well, with that, I want to thank our panelists for being here today for this great conversation. It's very relevant at this point. And I want to thank all the other panels before us today. It was a really great event, and what an honor to have all of you in our building. And like I said, we hope to have you back for other things. And like I said, we've also got internship programs, so please send your best and brightest. Thanks. Over to you, Richard.
Before we get, because we're gonna get a couple of pictures, but before we get up, we want to thank. Give yourself a round of applause. You guys have been here. Some of you guys have been here since 8:30 this morning. We had breakfast together. We had lunch together. Some of we might even have dinner together. Look, God bless your heart, and thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for stepping up for a cause that's worthy and a cause that's noble. Martin Luther King said, one cannot begin to live until he can rise above the narrow confinements of his own individualistic concerns to the broader concerns of all humanity. You all have chosen to be the Davids of this moment, and we thank God for you. We thank God for all the panelists that are here now, the panelists that were here before, because they're rising above themselves as well to a bigger cause. We prayed our way into this thing. We're going to pray our way out. If you would indulge me, please. God, we come to you with humble hearts, committed spirits. Lord, we thank you. We thank you for all the panelists. We thank you for the spirit of David that you've put in the hearts and the minds of the folks who drove from all over the state of Texas, some folks from Florida. Lord, we thank you for the spirit that you are pouring out across this nation, but particularly here in the state of Texas. We thank you for our partners. We thank you for Texas Public Policy Foundation. We thank you for the Texas Workforce Commission, the Austin Urban League, and Lord, we thank you for the Texas Legislative Black Caucus. Lord, we pray for our leaders. We pray for our leaders at TLBC that their spirits are joined with us in this battle for freedom, because freedom don't stop just with chains across our hands and feet. Freedom don't stop just with the chains across our hearts, but also the chains across our brains. Carter G. Woodson said the most dangerous thing is the miseducation of the Negro. And he said that in 1935, Lord, and it exists today. We pray and ask that you, as the folks go back to Houston, give them safe travel. They go back across Dallas. They go back to Florida. Give them safe travel. All over the country, give them safe travel. We ask that you watch over their families. You prepare their hearts for this battle and give us the strength, knowledge, and wisdom to do your will. And we ask these things in your most holy and gracious Son's name, Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. Amen. Amen. Let me get a picture of that. Let me get y'all a picture, guys. Before y'all walk off the stage, let me get you a picture.
What, like my impression is that Florida's at least 10 years, maybe 20 years ahead of Texas in terms of school.
It's actually mind-boggling that you guys are not
What's different about like, is it like everybody's talking about the rural like school districts?
Everybody says that now. As long as you reciprocate, you're good.
He's crazy. He's not getting it.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
That's where you came in?
Yeah.
You heard of Step Up for Students program?
Yeah.
No, the one over by, yeah, the one over by the stadium, by the, so I used to work for Madame DeVos. I passed by and looked at that thing, and I'm like, wow, that's incredible. Matter of fact, I have a woman that's a intercessor, my wife's who actually went to law school. I'll find out. I just saw her this weekend. I'll find out. She's got to be about.
I don't know where, baby.
That's true. Yeah, I know, but if I remember her telling me something before, she might have gone like a couple of years back. Assuming that she graduated around 28 and it took a couple of years to get 25. That had been at least 10, 12 years ago. You were teaching?
I taught there in my everything in my life has been good, so I don't think people want to read everything has been good.
Well, this is the thing. God, you ask us to do things that we may not, might not be on our agenda. But if you look at it, it's kind of like me saying, I don't want to do that, but who's waiting on the other side of my obedience? So it may not be what I want to do. It may be what someone's waiting for to be blessed by what you're doing. I mean, if you read a manual, it's not talking about people's problems, it's talking about how to get something done. So if you write it from that standpoint of, hey, I was faced with this, this is how I handle it. Faced with this, how I handle it. This is how I did it then, you can do it now. The problem was this then, the problem was this now, here's how I'd approach it. Boom.
You have to write a book.
So what I say to you is, just put that before the throne of grace and ask God what he wants you to do. They'll be with everything else if you tell them to write a book.
I mean, that's a good point, because when you're reading, like, if I'm trying to follow your path, I need to know how you built it, how you succeeded. And yeah, if you had some hardships, that makes it more interesting, but like, unless I run into those same ones, like, I actually just need to know how to follow it.
I don't necessarily go through all the problems. Now, when they start to come up, I consult with them and talk about how to get through that, how to mitigate it, how many of our people look at the traditional public school system and reflect us with upward mobility, but it's not the same delivery system anymore. I got to deal with that. But I'm basically telling them, this is how you deal with it. We had one newspaper in the state of Florida one of the things that you don't have until you just said something after all these years, something not well, but I'll play about supporting educational choice. We had Jeb Bush. Jeb Bush was like, yo, we're doing this. Yeah, we were helping with his re-election. So we were able to, he had that good budget. He was like, you can't figure out if your school's good enough? A, B, C, D. Oh, that's true. There you go. And so we helped with that, and we had the opportunity. Well, just now your position, now the governor's saying that you've got like minor issues that we didn't have, right? Which I think there should be a statute, there should be a waiting period for you changing parties. It's like, look, I mean, if things in nature take 9 months or more to give birth, I need to see you gestate. I need to see who you, because you can't hold that for that. And usually if you see even spiritual, you start to see people show who they really are after about 9 months, right? So like imagine like when you're dating, if you put, like I told my wife when we were dating, I said, hey look, everybody puts their best foot forward and they're faking the funk, and then you find out this is not the same person I married. I say, when I met you, I put all my crap on the table. I said, that is the best. Right? How many people are willing to be that honest? Right? How many people are looking for an agenda? Like, if you're getting grants from somebody, you want to show that you want to have outcomes and show that you're doing a good job. So you're partially double-minded because you're a mission, and then you got to show them that you're doing stuff, which means you have to really focus on what you're doing. Or you have someone that says, you're doing something great, they want to fund what you're doing to continue it, and then eventually you become dependent on that funding.